Hey, welcome to this week's show. You joined e-commerce office hours. I'm Alan Kent. I'm from Google, a developer advocate. This week we're going to be talking about single sign-up flows, and we've got two guests this week, and so we're going to make sure everything goes well. And but this week I thought we'd just jump straight into it. So the presentation this week is on single sign-on. I've got two guests with me, and oops, wrong button. We're going to bring up, we've got to bring up Frank. Oop. Should have practiced this one before. Here we go. Well, since we've got the pictures going from left to right on the stream, so I wonder if you two could introduce yourself. So Garima, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Garima Mimani, and I'm part of the web ecosystem consultant team based out of New York. So we work with a lot of our clients to help improve their mobile experiences. And as part of that, identity often comes up. And so we've done a lot of work around like helping clients improve their sign-in flows and make sure that it is as seamless and frictionless as possible. So I'm really happy and excited to.
Cool. We'll see how it goes for others. I've got a little bit of droppage of the sound quality there, so we're going to play this as we go along. So, but Frank, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, yes. So I'm Frank. I'm also a web ecosystem consultant, but from the Google Amsterdam office. So in the same team as Garima, but covering an entire different market, which is Northern Europe. So, and what we do is basically the same.
Cool. But thank you for both joining. This week, you've got a couple of slides, just a quick presentation to give a bit of an overview. I'll bring those up now. If you'd like to walk us through these slides. So I've got the first one up.
Sure. So let me check. So what we're looking at today is the Google sign-in suite, basically. So making it easy for your users to sign in and sign up, and ideally automatically sign them in when they come back to your website. And if you go to the next slide, we will see that there are, in general, 3 flavors of this product available. So flavor number 1 is using the credential manager. Flavor number 2 is using sign-in with Google. And the third one is Google One Tap. And each of them have a little bit of a different purpose and how they work. So the first one, credential manager, is mainly used when you want to know the user's email address and password, or username and password, and help the user re-authenticating by storing them in the password manager in the browser. And once the user uses those, he will be automatically also shared on other devices in the case of Android. So if you sign a user in using Credential Manager on the web in Chrome, and then the user comes back on Android, they might be using the same credentials. Similarly, in the sign-in with Google, you want to make it easy to authenticate, but the user only will be sharing their username, so there will be no password entered. And the authentication happens between your website, the user, and the Google backend. And thirdly, we have Google One Tap, which is an extension of the sign-in with Google button. So if you have the infrastructure and the implementation of sign-in with Google on your website, it is very easy to then start prompting the user more prominent to authenticate. And as you can see in the bottom right, it will prompt with their name and email address and picture. But only when a user clicks continue as Chippy in this case, we will share the information with the website. So those are the 3 products on a high level. Then maybe we can continue to slide number 10 from here, and we skip all the code samples and have them for reference.
Slide 10. Yep, sorry, I found it. Common scenarios?
Yeah, so the most asked question we get here, one back, sorry, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So how does this work? Well, in the case of a new user, it's very easy. The user clicks the sign in with Google button or the one tap button, and you simply register them in your database. And from that moment on, you have from the user an email address and their name, but no password, only an identifier that you can use to connect with Google. If you go to the next slide, as easy as signing up a user, it is to sign in the user when they come back, because once again, in your database, you will only find a reference to the email address of the user. So when the user clicks the sign in button again, or even in the case of auto sign in, Google will share with you the email address and you can look that up in your database. However, the third and probably more complex scenario on the following slide is what if your user already has an account on your website. So in your database, you have a username and password or email address and password. In that scenario, when the user clicks the sign in with Google, when he returns back to your website, you will see the email address that we provide, and you will already see an entry in your database. So in that scenario, you should be asking the user, saying like, well, it's nice that you want to sign in with Google, but you already have an account with a username and password. So please also enter your password one time so that we can verify it is you and connect those two authentication methods to your accounts. And that is, in a nutshell, the three products and the three most common scenarios.
Cool. So I'll just bring it up back to the right screen. So I've got a couple of questions, and if you're joining in, please feel free to drop a question in the chat, interrupt at any time. There is a little bit of a lag with the live stream, so when you question it may not appear immediately, but we'll get to it as quick as we can and focus on those. But we're just going to go through a few questions that I had as just to kick things off. But ultimately, the success of these calls is if we're helping you, the developers. So if you've got any questions, please do ask. But just so we've talked about the three different products. If you talked about your identity, like there's been Google+, there's your Gmail accounts, could you relate how these different identities and how they fit in with your product?
Sure, yeah, I can take that one. So typically, if a user is logged into the browser, the Chrome browser, typically, so the user's identity is kind of taken from there, and then the entire flow happens. But if you're not logged into the user browser, and if you're logged into, say, your Gmail account, the identity for the user is then taken from the Gmail account, and then it can be verified using your sign-in or one tap.
Okay, so there's a few different sources of identity that come up. Is maybe the best thing to do from here then is can we actually get a bit of a demonstration of a sign-in flow? And Frank, would you like to do a screen share, and I will get these other two windows out of the way and let you take over and demonstrate what it would be like on one of the sites maybe?
All right, let me share my screen, which is this one, which should be on right now.
I've got to, sorry, I've got to do something this end. This software has been too clever for me. All right, cool, go for it.
All right, so first a good example is of how Pinterest does the implementation, and you can see the box in the top right of the website. Is that when you land on Pinterest, it will ask you to authenticate, and in this case it will prompt you use Pinterest with Google, and once you click either one of your email addresses or accounts, or if you have only one account, it will only show one account, and click continue, it will authenticate you, and in this case with my Google email address, I don't have an account yet, so Pinterest will prompt me saying like, you don't have an account, so we can sign up and follow the sign up flow in this case. And I suppose it's asking me to enter a password. So I may have botched this demo because I have already a Pinterest account. So let me share with you another demo that I have right here. Which is one that I coded myself and hosted on Cloud Functions, which should pop up right here. So when we land on the website, it will prompt me the same functionality as you saw with Pinterest. When clicking the email address, once again, oh, an error occurred. That's the problem with demos. Let me then
Google never has problems with demos. We're superhuman.
Exactly. So when clicking my Google address, actually it does work, and now it does the backend verification to make sure that it is really me. And you will see now I am authenticated in this browser, right? So that's the nice thing about the One Tap. It's really in your face with your personalized information, and you can easily select one of your accounts, basically.
Cool. Is that the end of the demo?
That is the end of the demo, yes.
Then I shall bring us heads back. Oops. Made it. Sorry, this is the first time I've used this streaming software with 3 people, so it's a little bit more fun. But we've got a question from the chat, so thank you very much. I'm going to bring that up now. And the question is, are we working with CMS developers to implement this as plugins and modules? Particularly for a small business owner, will not want to implement this from scratch, obviously. I've got a bit of my own answer for this one as a backup, but is there anything that you know of in particular that working with CMS platforms?
So I saw that Magento just published or gave an innovation award around this topic, specifically for the credential manager. So they made it easy to install a plugin to use the credential manager on Magento, which helps them across platform to authenticate. So there's definitely efforts to make this go to the public. For a web developer itself, like I suppose, but I would have to check that, where there should be in development WordPress plugins, supposedly. But maybe Alan, you know more on that than I do.
Yes, so I work in the DevRel team who works with a number of these platforms. This product is it's effectively been relaunched, would be probably a better way of putting it, and it's quite recent, and so this is almost like hot off the presses. How long since it's been relaunched?
A month now, right, Frank?
Yeah, and so we're in the process of, we absolutely want to get it out to the various different platforms and make sure we've got everything lined up. This is really quite early on in the process, but for me, it's just the whole smoothness, like just the whole, like I go to e-commerce sites, I don't buy a whole heap online, but I do go around and you browse around, and one of the biggest pains I find personally is trying to remember every single password, or, oh, do I use the same password on yet another site, which I've got no idea how reliable they are and how well are they protecting my passwords and is it secure? And so I was keen to make sure people were aware of this. For many of the platforms, at the shorter term, I expect it to be more of extensions, and so it's just a matter of seeing what extensions exist, but just make sure it's the new one-tap sign-in, and if it's like a 3-year-old extension, no, it won't be the new one. This has only been live for about a month, but definitely we're going to be working more with the CMS platforms to try and get as many supported as possible. How many will be from Google, how many from third-party vendors? That's probably going to depend on each platform. The reality is we can't go off and build the extension for every single platform at once. It's just basically too much work, and so we encourage people building extensions to work with Google to get it onto particular platforms. I think it's just going to be more scalable and get it out faster. But thank you for the question. In terms of so the key aspects then, if we're just running through the one-tap experience, is one was the sign-in aspect of it, and so you didn't have to come up with another password, you didn't have to verify the email address, and the other aspect then was the returning user, who also would then do a single tap. Have I got that correct?
Yeah.
In terms of if somebody has come to a site before and returns, do they get automatically logged on, or do they have an option?
Yeah, so that work is done by the Credential Manager API, and I believe that if you go to password.google.com, you have an option where you can say that you want to re-authenticate the user. So, if you have provided that option and given access to re-authenticate the user, it will automatically re-sign you, like re-authenticate you, and you don't have to go in and do a sign in or click on the button again. It will do that automatically for you.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, is that something that the developer would be doing or something the user would be doing?
This would be done by the developer on the Credential Manager API, right?
Gotcha.
Frank?
Yes,
Yeah.
no, I just wanted to clarify that. So
Yeah.
the developer can choose which way they want it to behave on the site.
Right. And also the user has the permission to provide that authentication or not. I believe that if you go to password.google.com, within there is an option if you want to be re-authenticated.
Cool. And so, to me, the whole advantage of this are things like you don't have to remember yet another password because, let's break, if you're going to a minor e-commerce site, you might not go back very often, and trying to remember your account to go back and check on your order status, I find a pain because I'm not going to admit that I just reuse the same weak password on every one of these sites because I've got no idea how reliable they are, and so I just don't trust any of them. But having the one tap would be much better there. Another potential benefit that I can think of is around newsletter signups. Can one tap help with someone signing up for a newsletter?
Definitely, and the advantage there is that you don't have to do the verification of the email address, right? Because the user has registered this as a Google account, so it does not have to per se be Gmail, but we've made sure that the account has been verified and is a working email address.
And I assume,
however, something to keep in mind is when you prompt the user. So what we often see, the same with web notifications and the one tap, is when you prompt the user as soon as they land on the website, there's a high chance that they will immediately click the prompt away. So make sure that you ask at the appropriate time.
cool. And so by avoiding yet another user, what's the underlying protocol you use, just out of curiosity?
It uses the OAuth protocol.
Okay, cool. So it's basically open standards going on underneath the scenes for these things.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other benefits you want to highlight? And I'm thinking of like newsletter signups in particular, but accounts in general. What other benefits do you offer?
Frank, do you want to take that?
Well, first of all, things like beyond the fact of not having a password, also the flows, for example, for resetting a password or deactivating accounts, etc. There's already a lot done around that work, so you don't have to implement the reset password if you only use these open OAuth protocols like the Google sign-in. The other one is you can use it as a second factor. So if you can require the user both to be signed in at Google using their password and have your own either password or biometric security on top as a second factor. So you can combine them as you wish.
Yeah. And to add to that, I think the main benefit that I see personally is that Google is very, very invested in making sure that the user privacy and security is like top priority. So a lot of work has been done in terms of making sure everything is secure. I believe that there used to be some clickjacking issue earlier, which this new the new GIS, what we call the Google Identity Services, the new framework has kind of worked towards and making sure that you are able to really get the benefits out of all the security that we provide internally, and you don't have to do the heavy lifting for that. That you just want to let Google do that, and yeah. So I would say security definitely is one of the key benefits.
I remember talking over with my wife on a project with her work, and they were trying to set up their own identity server. and she was just listing out all the requirements to actually build the identity server. And it's sort of like, okay, yeah, so of course you've got to, oh no, don't use an encryption algorithm. You've got to make sure you use a one-way hash. And oh yeah, but don't forget to use a salt. And well, of course they've got to have a reset flow. And oh, but what happens if somebody spams it? And 3 questions about your private information, is that still best practice? And the list of requirements just went on and on and on when you actually got into it. And I don't think some people actually appreciate, if they really want to do it properly, how much work it is. And so just being able to tap into these existing identity providers and let them worry about identity, personally I think is a really good thing. To actually do a good job rather than just a half-hearted attempt on a site, which can actually make things, and the web in general, less secure. Because I guess also from my personal interest, I'm interested in trying to make the web more secure for shoppers, not just as an individual site. And so everything we can do to make the whole web secure, to me, is a good thing. Is there, I'm just looking through some questions I had up before. Are there other, we mentioned very briefly, I'm just jumping ahead a little bit, we mentioned very briefly before about one tap, and one of the things about e-commerce sites in particular is personalization can make a big difference. And an example of simple personalization, if you know the last search they did, maybe on the homepage when they return, you should be showing that product as a featured product rather than the default one. Or even if you just know like the user's gender and you don't have the full identity, you can bring up different offers on the first page when they return. And so personalization is known to improve conversion rates because you can show information that's more relevant to the user. Are there any particular ways in which one tap can help with that personalization journey?
So definitely. So what we've seen, like if you are able to sign in more users, right, you can recognize more users and have bigger buckets for doing customization or personalization. And we've seen in the past that implementing one tap increases the sign-in rate because it is more prominent. You make it so easy for the user to authenticate. So that basically adds to the amount of users that you can then personalize for. So if you have more users signed in, your personalization rate is higher, so you will supposedly be more successful and get better conversion rates there.
Cool. Any other details you wanted to add, Garima?
No, I think Frank kind of put that really well. So I mean, it increases the sign-ups, which. So I mean, just to make sure, I want to reiterate this fact that we are not really sharing a lot of any of the PII information that the user uses to sign in, right? There are 2 different flows within the sign-in, and one tap is only meant for authentication and to identify just the user. And once you have the user kind of identified, you can use the generalizations that you already have and do some sort of personalization on your own. So, and that is on the onus of the developer as well as the e-commerce websites.
Okay, well maybe if we jump into some of the more technical details. So for example, and you provided me some slides beforehand, so let me know if you want me to bring up one of those slides for you. But I'm thinking of things like email address. If the user is signed in, I assume we can get their email address, which would be for the newsletter sign-in. Is there any example code or anything that's worth looking for that?
Likely. Let me check which slide would be the best for that. Yeah, so if you go to slide number 7, you will see there an HTML code sample, which you can integrate without doing any backend work. So you could use the Google sign-in by only implementing some HTML and JavaScript on the front end of your website. Mm-hmm. So basically, what this shows you is, first of all, like the HTML required, and then in the JavaScript function, the on sign-in button function that is called when the user clicks the button. You can see it gets the basic profile and it handles the sign-in, obviously, on the Google end. And you can see there a list of data that you get from the user. Now, if you require more information than this, so this is what we call the basic profile as an authentication scope. If you want extra information, you need to ask the user for permission for another scope. So for things like address, or even if you want to do things with Google Drive, or you want to insert an item in their calendar, you need to request extra permissions. And for that, we'll paste the link in the chat of the flow that you can integrate for requesting the additional permissions on top of the basic profile.
Yeah, so that was one I was going to bring up in particular, because so you have the user's shipping address. Like if you've got their address details, a very common one on the e-commerce side is to sort of like, can I avoid you haven't typed your address in as well? And so that would be an example of an additional permission that would be required to be asked.
Yes.
Cool. In terms of moving on then, and we'll drop that link into the chat just in a moment. In terms of moving on, if you wanted to learn more about these APIs, what would be the best source you would be recommending?
Developers.google.com/identity. I think that is that contains everything. So within there, you can go into any specific flows that you need, and there are the API guidelines, and as well as like code snippets, everything that you need to do in order to implement the solution within your system.
Okay, cool. Lost my cursor. It's always bad when you lose your cursor. Cool. And so there's actually some information. We might drop some links in for both sign-in and for OneTap. So in terms of, could you just differentiate? So we're going to drop 2 other links in there as well. But could you just clarify the difference then between sign-in and OneTap, just to make sure that the difference between the 2 is clear?
Should I take it?
Go for
it. So you can use sign-in without using OneTap. That is basically the main. So on your login page, if you want to show the button, you use the sign-in with Google button. Mm-hmm. And as an extension to that, we can use the OneTap as a functionality to overlay the website with a more prominent prompt. However, if the user dismisses this banner, it could, and he returns to the website later on, it could not show up for another couple of hours or a day because there is a certain timeout. So you cannot keep prompting the user with the OneTap prompt. So with that in mind, you would always still need the fallback of the sign in with Google button.
Gotcha. So just to recap, the sign-in is the more traditional, here is a button, big button to click, and it will sign you in and go through the normal sort of sign-in flows. If you're already authenticated, it will just ask your permission, I assume, to say, hey, are you willing to share some information with this site? And the OneTap is that overlay up in the top corner where you can make it so as soon as you arrive on the page, that little drop down appears in the corner and says, hey, do you just want to sign on? And you just tap it once and you're onto the site.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The we've got a question from the chat. So I'll just bring it up now. When a user authenticates, is there some event dispatched in JavaScript? I'm thinking about the possibility of using this event to trigger a Google Ads tag for targeted audiences.
The answer is yes. So, and I can share to you on my screen what that sort of looks like, if that is possible.
The screen's all yours.
All right. So,
if I get the right window up, sorry.
A bit of a technical question. Let me show some of the code. So, if my screen is on.
Your screen is on. Anything you can do to enlarge fonts is always helpful.
Perfect. So let me just, so when I open this URL, it will actually put a console log, or I append some HTML every time something happens. And you can see, so the first stage is initializing OneTap. We request the information from Google. And in this case, it gives me a response, or in this case, the event saying, do not display the one tab because it has one time been suppressed by the user. And then it's, once again, it is evaluated to not displaying this for this reason. So if I show you the code in a little bit of a bigger font, you can see here, basically, we do an unload. After a small delay, we check if we have Google initialized, and there is the log functionality. We initialize the one tab, and then from there, every time we receive a prompt, it is being logged. So you can see all these different entries in the log are being handled by this function. So every time we receive a response, whether that is to display the one tab or when a user clicks a button, you can see here what is the data for that event in that case. And then from there on, you can start parsing that. So for example, if it is not displayed, we can say it is not displayed for this reason, or if there is no not displayed or is skipped, we can log that we are actually displaying the authentication pop-up. So there are various states and events triggered in JavaScript, yes.
So just to clarify, this is some demo code and you've chosen to put the log functions in there, and so they would replace it with whatever logic they would want to do. Is that correct?
Exactly, yes. So here you handle the fallback and for your statistics to see how many times was the pop-up displayed or not displayed and for what reason. Or if it was displayed, how many users clicked it or closed it or tapped outside the window. So all of those you can start measuring.
Cool. You're very welcome. Are there any other aspects that you would like to bring up? I've got through the main ones I wanted to do. My main goal was to make sure people were aware of OneTap and the new options, the new possibilities it brings up. I should take out a picture-in-picture mode. Hey, we've moved to different locations. Oh, I've got to get used to this software. Every time I bring people up, we jump, it's sort of like almost Brady Bunch-like. But anyway, are there any other aspects that you want to bring up? For me, the main advantage is that I really wanted to get people aware of there is a new offering here. Getting it onto the little corner is a much nicer experience for people to sign up. You don't have to do as much of the account management. Yes, we've got to convince all the CMS platforms to get all the extensions built. That will be coming along. I assume this is available on mobile and desktop?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep, because particularly on mobile, it's just a pain in the neck trying to type in usernames and passwords. And did you have any code snippets just handy, just off the cuff, for showing how you would go, like you mentioned, getting the extra context if you wanted to get, say, their shipping address? Do you have any code samples showing how to do that? No is okay to answer because I didn't warn you about this in advance.
I do not.
Cool.
So I would have to check whether that is one of the scopes you can request or whether that is not in there actually. So that's something we need to verify.
Okay, I'll come off and do that and follow that up in a following episode. Any other aspects?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention is that so if you already have the sign-in with Google, then adding the one tab is, I would say, less than an hour work, and that is maximum 1 hour work. So if you already have the infrastructure set up, you have the OAuth with the connection with the backend to verify the account, etc., then adding the one tab as an additional way of authentication should be a no-brainer because it is a very little bit of implementation time.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Any final comments or any other information you want to share with the audience?
I mean, I can share something. So based on the work that we've done with a lot of our partners, one thing that often comes up is, why should we be doing this? Like all this basic, like all the tech behind it is great, but why do we do this? And we've seen that with the number of the conversions between users, like typically within a lot of our retail as well as other partners, we've seen a very, very high conversion rate for the users. So that itself is, I would say, indicative of how such a simple technology, whether if you can use it, can really improve your business. And again, it depends a lot on what your business model is. But if your model is to get in a lot of users and make sure that they are converting well, then this is definitely something that you should be looking into to make sure that you're getting a very seamless and frictionless user experience.
Yep, I agree completely. Well, that was the end of the questions I had. If there's no other final comments or no other little demos or anything like that you want to bring up, we may actually wrap it up a bit early this episode. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for joining then. If you've got any follow-up questions, so one of the purposes of these calls is if you've got questions on anything to do with e-commerce, we get special guests who know about a particular area, but we're completely happy for people to bring up off-the-cuff questions, and we'll either try and do our best to answer them live from our knowledge or get you an answer and follow-up. But otherwise, wanted to thank you all for joining the call. If you've got any questions, don't forget to, if you want to hear about upcoming episodes, probably the easiest way is to subscribe to the channel, and you'll automatically get notifications of new sessions that come up. We're running them weekly. We may drop that off to bi-weekly in the near future, just to we've been sort of trying to get the message out and get a collection of videos up and going. But we're going to see how we go and going into the future. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining the call, and hope you're all staying safe. Thank you very much.